The rumor swept through the American lines like wildfire in the summer of 1944. The Germans had unveiled a new super tank, 70 tons of steel and fury, armor so thick it could shrug off Sherman shells, a cannon so formidable it could annihilate anything the Allies deployed from over 2 kilometers away. Allied intelligence dubbed it the King Tiger. German crews called it invincible. American tankers called it their worst nightmare. The first reports came from British forces engaged around Caen in Normandy. On July 11, 1944, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion deployed King Tigers against Allied positions. British tank commanders radioed back accounts that seemed unbelievable. Tanks larger than anything previously encountered. Shells ricocheting off frontal armor that appeared impervious. German tanks firing from distances where British guns could not respond effectively. The psychological effect was immediate and severe. American intelligence officers compiled reports from multiple sources. The British Second Army supplied combat assessments. Soviet military intelligence shared observations from the Eastern Front where King Tigers had already appeared. In August 1944, Free French resistance networks reported sightings of enormous tanks being transported by rail through occupied France. Every account painted the same picture. Germany had fielded a new category of armored vehicle that outclassed anything the Allies possessed. For months, whispers circulated about this mechanical behemoth. Reports filtered back from British units in Normandy. Soviet intelligence confirmed its presence on the Eastern Front. Every Allied tanker knew the specifications by heart. 180 mm of frontal armor on the turret. An 8.8 cm gun with a barrel over 6 m long. A combat weight that surpassed anything on tracks. This was not merely another tank. This was Germany's answer to Allied numerical advantage. A monster designed to restore German dominance on the battlefield. Allied tank crews studied intelligence briefings with mounting apprehension. The technical specifications seemed designed to instill fear. The King Tiger weighed 69.8 tons, more than twice the weight of a Sherman. Its 8.8 cm KWK-43 gun could pierce 150 mm of armor at 2000 m. The sloped frontal armor, 180 mm on the turret and 150 mm on the whole front, could defeat virtually every Allied anti-tank weapon in service. The psychological impact was immediate. American crews, accustomed to fighting Panzer IVs and even the formidable Panthers, now faced something entirely new. Intelligence briefings painted a grim scenario. The King Tiger could punch through a Sherman's front armor from ranges where return fire was impossible. It would take 4, perhaps 5 Shermans to flank and destroy a single King Tiger, with heavy casualties. Sleep came fitfully to men who knew such a predator prowled the battlefield. Tank commanders shared stories from British crews who had faced King Tigers. One British officer recounted watching his squadron's shells bounce harmlessly off a King Tiger's frontal armor at 800 m. Another described a King Tiger annihilating 3 Churchill tanks in quick succession before withdrawing unscathed. These reports circulated through Allied armored units, cementing a legend of invincibility around Germany's latest weapon. The fear was justified. Combat mathematics overwhelmingly favored the King Tiger in direct engagements. A Sherman 75 mm gun could not pierce the King Tiger's frontal armor at any realistic range. Even the improved 76 mm gun on later Sherman variants struggled against the King Tiger's thick sloped plates. British 17-pounder guns fared better, but only from advantageous angles and at shorter distances where the King Tiger's superior range allowed German crews first-shot advantage. In early July 1944, elements of the elite Panzer Division received the first 5 King Tigers allocated to Normandy. These tanks represented the pinnacle of German armored warfare. Each cost 321,500 Reichsmarks, equivalent to 3 smaller German tanks. Each consumed production resources that could have built 2 Panthers. These were not mass-produced weapons. These were precision instruments of destruction, hand-built with German engineering mastery, delivered to showcase German technological superiority at a time when the Reich desperately needed a miracle. The crews chosen to operate these titans were elite veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Kursk, who had fought through countless Soviet encirclements. They were pulled from the desperate fighting in the east to form the core of the 316th Remote Control Panzer Company attached to the Panzer. Their confidence was absolute. They had witnessed German armor's capabilities. They had watched Tigers shred Soviet formations. Now they would display this dominance to the Americans and British. These veterans brought hard-earned expertise to their new assignment. They understood armored warfare at a level few Allied crews could match. They knew how to position their vehicles for maximum advantage. They understood terrain, lines of sight, and creating kill zones where enemy tanks would be destroyed before closing in. Their experience made them formidable opponents even in lesser vehicles. In King Tigers, they expected to be unstoppable. When they first saw their new machines, these seasoned veterans were awed. The King Tiger dwarfed everything around it. Standing 3 m tall, stretching over 10 m in length including its gun, weighing 69.8 tons fully loaded, it dominated the terrain. The sloped frontal armor could deflect shells like rainfall. The gun, the magnificent 8.8 cm KWK-43, promised death to anything foolish enough to enter its sights. This was not merely a tank. This was a fortress on tracks, a weapon that could alter the course of the war. The crews performed familiarization drills on their new vehicles. They learned the quirks of the King Tiger's controls. Steering demanded more effort than lighter tanks. The transmission required careful shifting to prevent damage. Fuel consumption was staggering, burning 190 gallons to travel just 120 kilometers on roads, worse off-road. But these seemed acceptable trade-offs for the overwhelming firepower the King Tiger delivered. Orders came mid-July. The King Tigers would move from the assembly area to the front lines near Tilly and St. Lo. The journey was about 80 kilometers through French countryside. Crews meticulously performed pre-combat checks. Oil, tracks, fuel, ammunition, every system verified, double-checked, certified for combat. Mechanics approved. The company commander reviewed logs. Everything appeared flawless. These were brand new tanks, fresh from the Henschel factory, built with top-tier German engineering. What could possibly go wrong? The first King Tiger began its journey confidently. The Maybach HL230P30 engine roared, all 700 horsepower straining to move 70 tons of steel. The driver engaged the transmission, felt the tank lurch forward, and began heading to the front. Behind him, 4 more King Tigers followed, commanders proudly standing in their turrets, crews eager to display German superiority. Then, barely 10 kilometers into the journey, the first mechanical failure occurred. The lead tank's transmission began making sounds that no mechanic wants to hear. Grinding, metal on metal. The driver tried to compensate, shifting carefully, reducing speed. It made no difference. The gearbox, already stressed beyond its design limits by the tank's excessive weight, was failing. Within minutes, the King Tiger ground to a halt on a rural French road, blocking the entire column. Behind it, the crew dismounted in disbelief. This could not be happening. Not now, not to Germany's most advanced tank. The commander ordered immediate repairs, but the mechanics quickly delivered devastating news. The transmission was catastrophically damaged. The internal gears had stripped. The tank would need to be towed back to a repair facility for a complete gearbox replacement. Moving it would require another King Tiger or a massive recovery vehicle. Neither was immediately available. The Maybach OV1216B transmission installed in the King Tiger was fundamentally the same design used in the 45-ton Panther. German engineers had not significantly strengthened the gearbox components to handle the additional 25 tons of weight. Under the stress of moving 70 tons, gear teeth stripped, bearings failed, and synchronizers wore out rapidly. This first breakdown was not an isolated manufacturing defect. It was a systemic design flaw. 1 down, 4 remaining. The column reorganized and continued. Surely this was an isolated incident, a manufacturing defect. Bad luck. The war could not be won by sitting still. The front lines were calling. American and British forces were grinding forward. Every hour mattered. The remaining 4 King Tigers pressed on. Their commanders, now slightly less confident, but still determined to reach combat. 15 kilometers further, the second King Tiger began experiencing engine trouble. The Maybach engine, perfectly adequate for the 45-ton Panther tank, was desperately underpowered for 70 tons. The power-to-weight ratio was barely 10 horsepower per ton, far below what the tank needed for sustained operations. As the King Tiger climbed a modest hill, the engine temperature began rising. The cooling system, already marginal in design, could not cope with the excessive heat generated by an engine running at maximum output just to maintain basic speed. The driver watched his temperature gauges climb into the red zone. He reported the problem to his commander. They reduced speed, hoping to let the engine cool. It made no difference. The coolant was boiling. Steam began venting from the engine compartment. Within minutes, the overheated engine seized, the pistons expanding in their cylinders until they could no longer move. The tank coasted to a stop, smoke rising from the engine deck. German engineers had recognized the power deficit early in development. The Maybach HL230P30 generated 700 horsepower, identical to the engine in the much lighter Panther. Plans existed for an upgraded Maybach 234 fuel injection engine producing 800 horsepower, but production delays meant most King Tigers received the inadequate HL230. The result was predictable. Extended operations at high power output generated excessive heat, overwhelming the cooling system and causing cascading mechanical failures. 2 down, 3 remaining. Now the pattern was becoming clear and panic began creeping into the minds of the remaining crews. These were not isolated incidents. These were systemic failures. The King Tiger, for all its impressive armor and firepower, had a fatal flaw. It was too heavy for its own drivetrain. The engine, transmission, and cooling system were all operating beyond their design specifications. What looked invincible on the test range became a liability on campaign. The third tank made it another 20 kilometers before its final drive failed. The massive gears that connected the transmission to the drive sprockets simply could not handle the torque required to move 70 tons across variable terrain. The teeth stripped, the drivetrain seized, the tank stopped moving, its crew staring at each other in growing horror. The final drive problem would plague King Tigers throughout their service life. A report from Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 in September 1944 documented the crisis in detail. 12 final drive housings failed after only 50 to 100 kilometers of operation. Sprocket teeth sheared off under load. Track tension devices broke repeatedly. The battalion commander requested an urgent meeting with armaments officials to address the catastrophic failure rate. 3 down, 2 remaining. By now, the company commander was facing an impossible situation. Of 5 King Tigers that had departed that morning, only 2 remained operational, and they had not even reached the front lines yet. They had not fired a shot. They had not faced a single enemy tank. They had simply tried to drive 80 kilometers on roads and 60% of the force had mechanically disintegrated. The commander made the only decision he could. He ordered the remaining 2 tanks to proceed at reduced speed, nursing their overworked engines, praying their transmissions would hold together just long enough to reach friendly lines. Behind him lay 3 of Germany's most advanced tanks, immobilized not by enemy action, but by their own engineering. The 4th King Tiger failed 30 kilometers from the front. Suspension problems, the overlapping roadwheel design intended to distribute the tank's massive weight proved prone to damage. A wheel bearing seized. The wheel locked. The track threw itself off the drive sprocket. The tank lurched to a halt, tilting slightly to one side, completely immobilized. 4 down, 1 remaining. One single King Tiger from the original 5 actually reached German positions near Tilly. 1 out of 5, a 20% success rate. The crew of that lone survivor looked back at the trail of broken machines behind them and understood a terrible truth. Germany's super tank was not super at all. It was over-engineered, underused, and fundamentally flawed. But the story does not end there. The fate of these 5 King Tigers reflected a larger pattern that would repeat across multiple theaters. These particular tanks, chassis numbers 28001 through 28005, were the very first King Tigers produced, manufactured in March 1944 and equipped with early production Porsche turrets. They had been allocated to the 316 Funklenk Panzerkompanie, a specialized unit equipped with radio-controlled demolition vehicles operated from Tiger tanks. The unit's intended role was breaching fortifications using Remotec-controlled explosive charges. When the unit deployed to Normandy in June 1944, the 5 King Tigers remained at Chateaudun, roughly 200 kilometers from the front. They were deemed too unreliable for combat operations. The unit commander, facing urgent operational demands, made the practical decision to re-equip with 9 Sturmwurf assault guns instead. These were available, reliable, and immediately useful. The King Tigers sat and used monuments to wasted resources. By mid-August 1944, as Allied forces swept Through France, these 5 abandoned King Tigers became a liability. German forces could not repair them. They lacked the heavy recovery equipment needed to tow 70-ton vehicles. They had no spare parts for the complex drivetrains. The decision was made to destroy the tanks rather than allow them to fall into Allied hands. Demolition charges were placed. Turrets were blown off their rings and the hulks were left beside French roads. Within days, American forces advancing through the area began encountering these abandoned King Tigers. The first crews to spot them approached with extreme caution, expecting ambush, expecting fire from those feared 8.8 centimeters guns. Instead, they found silence, empty tanks, hatches open, crews long gone. The Germans, unable to recover or repair these monsters, had simply destroyed what they could and abandoned the rest. American tankers could not believe what they were seeing. They had been told these machines were invincible. They had been warned that encountering a King Tiger meant almost certain death. Yet here they sat, lifeless, defeated not by American guns, but by German engineering. The first intact King Tiger captured by American forces became an intelligence gold mine. Technical intelligence teams from 1st Army arrived with cameras, measuring devices, and cutting equipment. Engineers from the Ordnance Department joined them. British liaison officers contributed expertise. The examination would take days and produce reports that circulated through Allied command structures. Engineers and technical specialists crawled over every centimeter of the Techling's tickly abandoned vehicle. They wanted to understand everything about this machine. They needed to know its capabilities, its weaknesses, and how to defeat it. What they discovered shocked them to their core. The armor was indeed impressive. 180 millimeters at the turret front sloped at 80 degrees from vertical. 150 millimeters on the hull front sloped at 50 degrees. This was armor that could resist virtually every American and British tank gun in service. Shells that would have penetrated a Panther simply bounced off the King Tiger's glassy plate. From the front, this tank was nearly invincible. Test firings against captured armor plates confirmed that standard 75mm Sherman rounds could not penetrate at any range. Even the improved 76mm rounds struggled against the thick sloped armor. The gun was equally impressive. The 8.8 cm KWK-43 could penetrate 5 in of armor at 2000 m range. This was a weapon that outranged, outgunned, and outclassed every Allied tank cannon. In a direct gunnery duel at long range, the King Tiger had every advantage. The gun used separate loading ammunition with the projectile and propellant charge loaded independently. This slowed the rate of fire compared to single-piece ammunition, but allowed for much higher muzzle velocities and greater penetration. American engineers measured the barrel length at 6.3 m, over 71 times the caliber. They examined the breech mechanism, the recoil system, and the mounting. Everything was built to exceptional standards. The optics impressed them particularly. German Zeiss rangefinding equipment and gun sights were acknowledged as the finest in the world. A King Tiger crew could identify and engage targets at ranges where Allied tanks could barely see them. But then the engineers began examining the drivetrain and understanding dawned. The transmission was the same basic design used in the Panther, a tank that weighed 25 tons less. The gears were not significantly stronger. The bearings were not notably larger. German engineers had essentially taken a transmission designed for a medium tank and expected it to handle the loads of a super heavy tank. The result was predictable. Under sustained operation, the transmission components would fail. Engineers found physical evidence of this throughout the captured vehicle, where patterns on gear teeth showed excessive loading. Bearing races showed scoring and spowing. The synchronizer rings were worn thin. An American mechanical engineer from Detroit who examined the transmission wrote in his report that no automobile manufacturer in America would have approved this drivetrain for a vehicle of this weight. The design margins were simply inadequate. The engine situation was even worse. The Maybach HL230P30 produced 700 horsepower, perfectly adequate for the 45-ton Panther. But in a 70-ton King Tiger, that same engine was desperately struggling. The power-to-weight ratio was barely 10 horsepower per ton. By comparison, the American Sherman at 30 tons with a 400 horsepower engine achieved over 13 horsepower per ton. The King Tiger was actually less mobile than the tank it was designed to dominate. American engineers calculated fuel consumption based on tank capacity and reported operational ranges. The numbers were staggering. The King Tiger carried 860 L of fuel in its internal tanks. This provided approximately 120 kilometers of road range under ideal conditions. Off-road range was significantly less, perhaps 80 to 90 kilometers. Combat operations with frequent maneuvering, acceleration, and high power demands could drain the tanks in less than 60 kilometers. For comparison, a Sherman carried 660 L and could travel 200 km on roads. The King Tiger needed 30% more fuel to travel 40% less distance. The logistics implications were devastating. A German armored column containing King Tigers would need nearly double the fuel trucks of a comparable American formation. In 1944, when Germany faced critical fuel shortages, this disadvantage was crippling. The cooling system could not cope with sustained operations. Engineers examined the radiators, coolant passages, and cooling fan. Everything was adequately designed for normal operations, but the King Tiger rarely operated normally. The underpowered engine ran at high output constantly, generating excessive heat. The radiators could not dissipate heat fast enough. The coolant would boil, pressure would build, gaskets would fail, and the engine would seize. Evidence from the Eastern Front supported these findings. Soviet forces had captured 2 King Tigers in August 1944 near Sandom in Poland. These tanks were transported to the Kubinka Proving Ground near Moscow for detailed testing and evaluation. Soviet engineers subjected the King Tigers to the same rigorous testing they applied to their own vehicles. The Soviet testing program revealed the depth of the King Tigers' mechanical problems. During transfer to Kubinka, both captured tanks suffered multiple breakdowns. The cooling system proved insufficient for hot weather operations. Engine temperatures exceeded safe limits repeatedly. One tank's gearbox failed completely during the journey. The other's right suspension required complete replacement and full functionality could not be restored even with German spare parts captured alongside the vehicles. Once at Kubinka, Soviet engineers conducted systematic trials. They drove the King Tigers across various terrain types, measured fuel consumption, tested maximum speed, and evaluated reliability. The results were damning. The tank broke down every 10 to 15 kilometers in hot weather. The cooling system consistently failed when ambient temperatures exceeded 30 degrees Celsius. The gearbox overheated due to insufficient cooling. And the hot external environment. Soviet engineers tested the King Tiger's armor by firing captured German 88mm guns at it. They discovered that the King Tiger's own gun could penetrate the turret of another King Tiger at 400 m range. While this demonstrated the power of the gun, it also revealed that the armor, while thick, was not as invincible as propaganda suggested. The welding quality was noted as significantly worse than comparable German designs like the Tiger I. Despite careful German workmanship, the final drive, connecting transmission to tracks, was another critical weakness that both American and Soviet testing confirmed. The gears had to transmit enormous torque to move 70 tons under the stresses of combat maneuvering. Turning in place, reversing quickly, these components failed with alarming regularity. Multiple captured King Tigers showed evidence of final drive failure. The problem was so severe that German field commanders issued directives warning Tiger crews against unnecessary maneuvering that would stress the final drives. American engineers compiled their findings into detailed technical reports. Intelligence Bulletin No. 184 issued by First Army in September 1944 contained extensive technical data on the King Tiger. The report circulated through Allied armored units, providing tank commanders with accurate information about German capabilities and vulnerabilities. The conclusion was remarkable. The King Tiger, while formidable in direct combat, was its own worst enemy. Its excessive weight made it a maintenance nightmare. Its underpowered engine limited strategic mobility. Its complex transmission required constant attention. Its suspension clogged with mud, especially in winter conditions. When freezing temperatures locked the overlapping wheels solid, the intelligence assessment concluded that a properly positioned King Tiger in a defensive ambush was extremely dangerous. Its gun and armor gave it decisive advantages. But a King Tiger on the offensive, maneuvering across country, advancing for hours or days, would likely break down before engaging the enemy. The longer the advance, the higher the breakdown rate. The more complex the terrain, the more stress on already overtaxed systems. This understanding changed American tactical doctrine immediately. Instead of fearing the King Tiger as an invincible predator, commanders now understood it as a powerful but fragile weapon. The solution was not to engage it frontally in a gunnery duel. The solution was to force it to move, to advance, to maneuver. Every kilometer it traveled increased the chance of mechanical failure. Every hill it climbed stressed its engine. Every turn wore down its transmission. American forces also learned that King Tigers, because of their weight, could not cross most bridges. They were too heavy for standard military bridging equipment. Engineers calculated that the King Tiger's ground pressure, despite its wide tracks, was still substantial. Bridges rated for 50 tons would not support a 70-ton tank. Rivers that other German tanks could afford were impossible barriers. This meant King Tiger movements were constrained to specific routes, making them predictable and vulnerable to air attack. The fuel consumption was staggering compared to Allied vehicles. The King Tiger burned through 190 gall to travel just 120 kilometers. On roads. Off-road, the consumption was even worse, sometimes reaching twice that rate. By comparison, a Sherman could travel over 200 kilometers on similar fuel. This meant King Tigers required massive logistical support. A supply train Germany simply could not maintain by late 1944. Perhaps most telling was the production bottleneck. Germany built just 492 King Tigers during the entire war. Production began in January 1944 and continued until March 1945. Just one tank in 1943. 379 in 1944, 112 in 1945 before production ceased. Compare this to the 35,000 Panzer produced, or the 6,000 Panthers, or the 50,000 Shermans built by America alone. For the resources consumed by one King Tiger, Germany could have built 3 Panthers or 5 Panzer IVs. The mathematics of industrial warfare were unforgiving. Allied strategic bombing contributed significantly to the low production numbers. Royal Air Force Bomber Command targeted the Henschel factory in Kassel repeatedly throughout 1944. Raids in September and October destroyed machine tools, disrupted assembly lines, and killed skilled workers. Production fell from over 100 King Tigers per month in summer 1944 to just 30 per month by year's end. Each bombing raid set production back weeks as workers cleared rubble, repaired machinery, and re-established workflow. The Schweres Panzer Abteil 501 arrived on the Eastern Front in August 1944 with 45 King Tigers. Only 8 were operational when they reached the battlefield. 37 had broken down during transit. 37 brand new tanks fresh from the factory, mechanically defeated before firing a shot. This was not an army preparing for victory. This was an army watching its most advanced weapons disintegrate from internal failures. The battalion had entrained at Padborn on August 5, 1944. Bound for southeastern Poland, the journey covered roughly 800 kilometers by rail. Even rail transport proved problematic. King Tigers were too heavy for many railway cars. Special heavy-duty flat cars were required. Loading and unloading required specialized ramps. The weight distribution had to be carefully managed to prevent car failure. Several King Tigers were damaged during loading when ramps collapsed under the excessive weight. After draining near the Vistula River, the battalion attempted a 50 km road march to their assigned positions. This relatively short movement became a disaster. Final drive failures occurred. First, tanks ground to a halt as drive sprockets failed under load. Then transmissions began failing. Gear synchronizers broke. Bearings seized, clutches burned out. Within 2 days of beginning the road march, 37 of 45 King Tigers were immobilized, awaiting repair. The 8 operational King Tigers that did reach the front lines immediately entered combat against Soviet forces attempting to expand their bridgehead at Barono Sandys. On August 11 and 12, 1944, these King Tigers engaged T-3485s in close-range combat around the town of Uglando. 3 King Tigers were destroyed in an ambush. Soviet tanks firing from concealed positions hit the King Tigers from the side where armor was thinner. Ammunition explosions killed most of the crew members. This engagement led to a tactical change. German armored doctrine had stored main gun ammunition in the turret for easy crew access. The Oblandau losses demonstrated that turret hits could cause catastrophic ammunition fires. After this battle, King Tigers stored all main gun ammunition in hull racks, reducing the ready rounds, but greatly improving crew survival in the event of turret penetration. The modification reduced ammunition capacity from 84 rounds to 68 rounds. By March 1945, German records show that King Tigers achieved a 59% operational readiness rate. This meant that at any given time, nearly half the force was broken down, awaiting repair. Statistics compiled on March 15, 1945, showed King Tigers at 59% readiness compared to 62% for the Panzer IV and 48% for the Panther. The King Tiger was actually more reliable than the Panther by war's end, though still substantially worse than older, simpler designs. This improvement came from hard-learned experience. Henschel engineers worked closely with field units to identify and address mechanical problems. Modified seals, reduced oil leaks, improved gaskets prevented coolant loss. Strengthened drivetrain components lasted longer under load. A new track design with wider links distributed weight better. Improved driver training, reduced mechanical abuse. Better maintenance procedures caught problems before they became failures. By early 1945, the King Tiger was a far more reliable vehicle than the early production models. But by then, Germany lacked the fuel, spare parts, and industrial capacity to maintain even this improved readiness rate. The Battle of the Bulge provided the ultimate test case for King Tiger reliability under operational conditions. Camp Grouper Piper spearheading the German offensive in December 1944 had approximately 45 King Tigers from Schwer SS Panzer Teilung 501 attached to the 1st SS Panzer Division. The plan called for a rapid advance to seize bridges over the Meuse River, cutting off Allied forces, and capturing fuel depots to sustain the offensive. Camp Grouper paper crossed into Belgium on December 16, 1944. Advancing through the Lossym Gap. The force included roughly 4,800 soldiers, 600 vehicles, and the attached King Tigers. The advance began promisingly. American defenses were thinly spread. Resistance was light initially. Piper's column seized the town of Hansfeld and captured an American fuel dump, refueling his vehicles. But mechanical problems began immediately. Approximately 12 King Tigers never left the assembly area due to mechanical failures before the offensive even started. The remaining tanks accompanied Piper's advance towards Stavelot, where his force captured a bridge over the Inlave River on December 18. From there, the advance continued toward Lays, a small Belgian village that would become Piper's final position. Only 6 King Tigers successfully reached Lays with Piper. The others had broken down en route or been left to guard key positions at Stavelot and Thuan. Tank number 213 was among those 6 commanded by SS Obermführer Helmuth Dollinger. Dollinger's original tank had broken down, so he assumed command of 213, which had been crewed by SS Schafura Franz Fastman. The King Tigers were positioned around Els to defend against the inevitable American counterattack. Tank 213 along with Tank 221 commanded by SS Unmurer Georg Hanisch took up positions at Wimont Farm, on high ground south of Els. Their commanding position overlooked the road from Trawonce, providing excellent field of fire against approaching American forces. On December 21, 1944, American forces attacked. Task Force Major and Task Force Lovelady of the 3rd Armored Division advanced up the valley with approximately 25 tanks. The King Tigers opened fire at extreme range, roughly 2,000 m. At that distance, the American tank guns could not respond effectively. The King Tigers had overwhelming advantage, but the Americans kept coming, using terrain for cover, advancing in bounds, closing the range. Return fire intensified. An American round struck Tank 213's main gun barrel, damaging it severely so the weapon could not be fired. The precise circumstances remain uncertain. Some reports suggest a fortunate shot struck the barrel directly. Others indicate the tank was doomed after being hit multiple times until cumulative damage rendered the gun unusable. Regardless of the exact cause, Tank 213 was left combat ineffective. Dollinger sustained a head wound during the engagement, likely from shell fragments penetrating the crew compartment. He took shelter in the cellar of Wimont Farm while his crew attempted repairs. By then, Camp Grouper Piper's situation had become critical. Cut off from supply lines, nearly out of fuel and ammunition, surrounded by American forces, Piper had no options left. On December 23, Piper received authorization to retreat, but movement in armored vehicles was impossible. The King Tigers and other heavy machines were completely out of fuel. Piper made the only viable choice: the force would withdraw on foot, abandoning all heavy equipment. Approximately 800 men escaped the encirclement overnight from December 23 into December 24, moving cross-country to rejoin German lines near Wani. 770 survivors eventually reunited with their parent division. Behind them, Piper's force left 135 armored vehicles, including 6 King Tigers, 13 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, and more than 50 half-tracks and other vehicles. Demolition teams attempted to destroy the equipment, but time was limited and American forces were closing in. Many vehicles, including Tank 213, were captured largely intact. After the battle, American recovery units moved through Laz, retrieving abandoned German hardware. Tank 213 proved difficult to extract due to its position on the narrow farm road. In July 1945, the U.S. Army prepared to tow it away for scrapping. Jenny Jinan Dews, owner of a local cafe, intervened. She reportedly offered American soldiers a bottle of cognac in exchange for the tank. Her motivation was preservation. She wanted the tank to remain in Laz as a memorial to the village's wartime suffering. The Americans agreed. Tank 213 was relocated to the village square in front of the church, where it remained for years, gradually deteriorating until local preservation efforts began in 1951. Sections of the damaged gun barrel were replaced using parts from nearby abandoned Panther tanks in 1975. The vehicle underwent complete restoration and repainting, after which it was moved to its current location outside the December 44 Museum, where it remains the only King Tiger displayed on its original battlefield in Europe. Another King Tiger, tank number 332, has an equally well-documented history. This tank came from Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 501 and was abandoned near Petit Coup in Belgium on December 24, 1944. Sergeant Glenn George of the 740th Tank Battalion discovered the intact vehicle while on patrol. His unit was attached to the 82nd Airborne Division defending the northern flank of the Bulge. Tank 332 was in remarkably good condition despite being abandoned. The crew had attempted to destroy it before withdrawing, but American forces arrived before they could finish. The tank was recovered by the 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company and transported to Spar, Belgium, then shipped via Antwerp to the United States. Tank 332 arrived at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed inspection. American engineers subjected it to the same scrutiny applied to previous captures, measuring, photographing, testing, and documenting every aspect of the vehicle. The tank remained at Aberdeen for roughly 40 years, displayed outdoors, where weather gradually degraded its condition. In August 1991, Tank 332 was transferred to Fort Knox, Kentucky for exhibition at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor. To create a cutaway educational display, technicians opened the left side of the hull, exposing the interior layout, ammunition stowage, and mechanical systems. This allowed visitors to see inside a King Tiger, understanding how the crew operated and how its systems functioned. Tank 332 later moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, where it remains in the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection. It is the only intact King Tiger captured by American forces during World War II. The psychological effect on German tank crews was devastating. These men had been promised an invincible war machine that would restore German battlefield dominance. Instead, they inherited a mechanical liability that broke down frequently, consumed fuel at ruinous rates, and required specialized recovery equipment that was rarely available. The gap between propaganda and reality demoralized even seasoned crews. For American tankers, the evolution in perception was remarkable. In July 1944, even mentioning a King Tiger invoked fear. Intelligence briefings painted it as nearly unstoppable. Combat reports from British units described it as invincible. Every rumor amplified its terror. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, American crews had learned the truth. Yes, the King Tiger was formidable in direct combat, but it was also highly likely to be out of fuel, broken down, or abandoned after mechanical failure. The invincible monster had been revealed as a flawed weapon system. American after-action reports from the Bulge noted that more King Tigers were found abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion than destroyed by Allied fire. Tank crews discovered King Tigers along roads with tracks thrown, engines seized, or transmissions failed. Some were abandoned with minor damage that could have been easily repaired on more reliable vehicles. But the King Tiger's complexity made field repairs nearly impossible without specialized tools and trained personnel. Technical interrogations of captured German crews revealed the depth of the problem. Drivers reported that the gearbox demanded constant careful shifting to avoid damage. Any aggressive maneuvering or emergency requiring rapid speed changes risked transmission failure. Commanders reported that tanks could not be relied upon to complete long-distance movements. Every march required factoring in breakdowns and recovery operations. Maintenance personnel noted that repairing a King Tiger required specialized tools, rare parts, and skilled technicians. Replacing a track on a Sherman could be done by the crew in an hour using basic tools. A track on a King Tiger, with overlapping road wheels and complex suspension, could take a full day with specialized equipment. Its overlapping wheel design meant removing multiple outer wheels to replace an inner one. In winter, mud and ice froze between the wheels, making maintenance nearly impossible under field conditions. A failed transmission required complete replacement, a task needing heavy lifting equipment and multiple days of work. The transmission alone weighed over half a ton, requiring jacks and hoists for removal and precise alignment for installation. Most field maintenance units lacked the tools and expertise to perform this work. A King Tiger with a transmission failure typically had to be towed to a rear workshop, assuming a recovery vehicle capable of moving 70 tons was available. The final lesson came from production statistics, which illustrated how industrial capacity shapes victory. Germany consumed the resources of 3 medium tanks to produce a single King Tiger. In the same time, America built 11 Shermans with similar resources. For every King Tiger Germany deployed, America deployed 11 Shermans, all more reliable, easier to maintain, and able to reach the battlefield. American factories produced tanks at a pace Germany could not match. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit built over 18,000 Shermans between 1942 and 1945. A single American plant produced more tanks than all German King Tiger production. Ford Motor Company built over 1,000 Shermans per month at peak output. General Motors, American Locomotive Company, and other manufacturers contributed tens of thousands more. This production advantage extended beyond raw numbers. American factories could replace losses rapidly. A destroyed Sherman could be replaced in weeks, whereas a destroyed King Tiger could not be replaced in the war's final months as production collapsed. American logistics delivered replacement tanks efficiently. German supply chains struggled to deliver fuel to existing vehicles, let alone replacements. American examination of captured King Tigers shaped post-war armored vehicle thinking: reliability over raw power, simplicity over sophistication, sustainability over capability. These principles guided the design of the M48, M60, and M1 Abrams. Engineers realized the most powerful gun was worthless if the tank could not reach combat. The thickest armor offered no protection if the tank broke down before encountering the enemy. Advanced technology meant nothing if field mechanics could not maintain it. These lessons, learned from studying the King Tiger's failures, became foundational principles of American military vehicle design. The King Tiger remains famous today in films, video games, and popular culture as the ultimate German tank. That reputation is partly deserved. In direct combat, correctly positioned and supplied, the King Tiger was indeed formidable. British tanker Ken II, who fought in Normandy, described encountering one as terrifying. Its massive size, thick armor, and powerful gun combined to create a vehicle that dominated any engagement where it could be brought to bear effectively. But that scenario was rare. More common were the long marches, mechanical stress, and logistical challenges that those first 5 tanks faced in July 1944. Of the 492 King Tigers produced, the vast majority were lost to mechanical failure, fuel shortage, or abandonment rather than combat destruction. This was not the weapon that changed the war. It symbolized Germany's inability to match Allied industrial power. For the American soldiers who found those first abandoned King Tigers in the summer of 1944, the experience was transformative. They had feared German technological superiority, but then discovered reality: the most advanced German tank could not complete an 80 km road march without catastrophic failure. The supposedly invincible weapon could not reach the battlefield under its own power. Germany's fate was clear: a nation that could not build reliable tanks, fuel its armies, or maintain its equipment could not win a war of industrial attrition against America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The broken King Tigers proved it unequivocally. These abandoned tanks became potent symbols. American industrial strength and mechanical reliability defeated German technological sophistication. The war would be won not by the best tank, but by the most numerous tanks that actually functioned. That lesson, learned at tremendous cost, shaped military thinking for generations. The King Tiger's true legacy lies not in its fleeting combat prowess, but in demonstrating that sophisticated engineering without dependable execution is ultimately worthless. That was the real story of the King Tiger.